Looking back at the previous Golden Boy winners, you see Messi, Rooney, Mbappe, Pogba and Götze. And though they did experience completely different levels of success, no other Golden Boy went on to live such a tragic life as Anderson. He arrived in Europe as the next Ronaldinho, but instead, after some decent seasons, his time at the top level saw him nearly die in a car accident, go through the traumatic death of his stepfather after having already lost his biological father, being dropped from the squad and forced to train with the under-23s before going back to Brazil, and being completely humiliated with historic relegations coming one after the other, culminating in early retirement in his alleged involvement in a bank robbery. It's incredible just how much happened to just one guy, so welcome to the life of Anderson. Let's go. Back before he had even turned 10 years old, his local club met Grêmio, and Anderson would not only score his team's only goal as they got completely humiliated, he would make sure it was an absolute screamer, so impressive that he got signed on the spot. However, not long after, Anderson was hit with a tragedy that everyone could have seen coming. As Anderson once claimed, his father was a drunk that sat at home drinking liquor like it was water. On many occasions, the only reason he even managed to find his way back home was because Anderson himself would carry him through the door. But one day, a heart attack put an end to all of it. Still, every disaster has a silver lining, and in his case, it was the fact that Anderson was forced to become the man of the family, to grow up and leave his friends behind. I know, this doesn't sound like a good thing. But his neighborhood was a terrible place, and many of the kids he shared his childhood with ended up turning to drugs and crime, passing away before they even made it past their teenage years. While Anderson was quite simply just too busy training and taking care of his family to follow that same path. Having been born in Porto Alegre, now playing for Grêmio after an incredible display at such a young age and with the premature death of his father from a heart attack still haunting him, the parallels with Ronaldinho, who at the time was on a steady rise to the top, were there for everyone to see, and soon the comparisons would start. In fact, at around 14 years of age, he was already earning a salary, 800 reais a month, that went a long way to help his mother, who was stuck working 2 jobs to take care of him and his 3 siblings. However, those struggles would all end very soon, as at the young age of 16, Anderson's incredible skills earned him his first professional contract, now valued at 40,000 reais a month. He was officially a teenage star, but unfortunately, with 7 matches played in that first season, all of his flicks and tricks weren't enough to save Grêmio, who finished at the very bottom of the table, getting relegated for only the 2nd time in their history. In his 2nd season, Anderson gained a lot of notoriety for his time with the under-17 national team, being one of the main men in a team that wasn't necessarily the most talented, but that still went on to win the South American Championship, as he managed 5 goals in 7 matches, and making it to the final of the World Cup, with Anderson being named the player of the tournament. But on the other hand, domestically, it was a really tough season. Grêmio had scraped their way to a final with Náutico. Whoever won would be promoted, and with the financial state Grêmio were in, if they lost, it could very well be the end of the club. 30 minutes in, Náutico had already missed a penalty. The match went on, emotions overflowing, and by the 78th minute, the first Grêmio player gets sent off. They were already going crazy, but 2 minutes later a shot goes off, it hits the arm of a Grêmio player, it seems to be outside the box, but the referee points to the penalty spot, the player starts pushing the referee, gets sent off. Suddenly there's a mob of players going at it, red cards all over the place, the police get sent into the pitch with riot shields and all of that, and before you knew it, everyone was on the pitch as well, from fans to executives to coaches and journalists. 3 more players had been sent off. Grêmio were left with only 7 players, with one of them even trying to rip off the grass from the penalty spot to force the match to be cancelled. But after 25 minutes, the penalty was finally taken and they made history. The goalkeeper saves it, quickly gets it back, hits it towards Anderson, and he goes all the way to the other side of the pitch, where he gets fouled, but instead of waiting around, they take the free kick quickly, and Anderson gets the ball again, dribbles everyone before dinking it over the keeper, sending Grêmio to the first tier once again. It was an insane match like no other in the history of football, something only Brazil could have provided. Impressively, despite being yet to play any substantial amount of top-tier football, these incredible displays were enough to convince FC Porto to go all out for his transfer, even paying for his mother to move to Portugal so they could sign him before he even turned 18, paying 7 million euros for the player. Still, after joining in January, Anderson only played 5 matches all season. It could seem weird, but in reality, Adrians, the coach at the time, was so convinced of his talent, he decided they would be better off keeping Anderson off the pitch in order not to attract too much attention to his talent, making sure they would get to have him for a full season before someone triggered his release clause. That's just how good he was. Once the next season started, he went right into the first team, being handed the number 10 shirt, which had just been worn by the likes of Quaresma and Deco, putting all the pressure in the world on his shoulders. And still, Anderson managed to impress Sir Alex in a preseason friendly against United, as well as scoring on his first match and assisting in the following 2. After 11 matches, everyone was already convinced Porto had struck gold with their new youngster, who was already putting on a show against the likes of Arsenal in the Champions League, but then they faced Benfica and their rivals ruined their party, with Katsouranis literally breaking Anderson's leg. Still, after nearly half a year, the 18-year-old made his comeback, finishing the season on a high note and attracting interest from everyone, from Mourinho over at Chelsea to Real Madrid. But what they didn't know is that ever since that friendly match, Sir Alex had tasked his very own brother with scouting the player, and the reports he got back were absurd. He told him, "Alex, he's better than Rooney," and Fergie would not hesitate, paying 30 million euros for a 19-year-old who had started less than 30 professional matches, and even handing him Rooney's number 8 shirt. This incredible rise led him to be named for the Copa America, even though he was yet to even play a friendly for the national team. Regardless, and despite the lack of minutes in the tournament, with Brazil eventually taking the trophy, Anderson was named the South American champion as well. Back in England though, Manchester United fans were still relatively salty that they had lost out on the signing of Ronaldinho just 3 years earlier, and once they found out about all the parallels between the two, many saw Anderson as a sort of rebound signing, forcing him to put out a statement saying, "Ronaldinho is Ronaldinho, Anderson is Anderson." Regardless, at first they tried to play him right behind Rooney, but things didn't pan out very well. They had failed to realize that ever since breaking his leg, Anderson had lost a yard of pace, and in the Premier League, it stuck out tremendously, forcing Sir Alex to improvise, eventually finding him a role as a box-to-box midfielder, which thanks to his incredibly efficient tackling and his strength, suited him perfectly, meaning he quickly went from being the next Rooney to being seen more as the next Paul Scholes, with his Ronaldinho-like skills making him a fan favorite instantly. This only improved as at the end of the season, Man United made it to the final of the Champions League, which eventually went on to penalties, with Anderson being brought on solely for the shootout. At 20 years old, he had to score a penalty in sudden death that would define their season, and he surprisingly delivered, being named the champion of Europe as Anelka missed his shot. To finish off the year, Anderson established himself as an important part of what was at the time the strongest team in the world, ending his year by winning the Club World Cup and above all being named as the new holder of the Golden Boy Award, considered quite simply the most promising young talent in the planet. What he didn't expect is that just a few weeks later, an injury would leave him out for 1 month, which would snowball, eventually leaving him out of the team's rotation. And even though he did partially join United in their almost victorious Champions League run, the following season it happened all over again, with Anderson getting hit with a heavy 6-month injury this time around, which culminated in him never being called up for the Brazilian national team again and sent him on a downward spiral towards the premature end of his career. It all started derailing immediately towards the beginning of the following season. The first strike came in January, falling out with Ferguson over his lack of commitment to fitness and excessive weight, which was immediately followed by an even worse blow, with Anderson traveling to Brazil without his permission, being fined by the club and dropped for several games, coming back in February and immediately rupturing his ACL, with the medical team expecting him to be out for months. However, he still managed to take it all up a notch. While he was injured, he went back to Portugal, but instead of focusing on recovery, he ended up going from nightclub to nightclub, eventually leaving one of them in his Audi R8, bringing 2 of his friends with him, despite the fact the car only had 2 seats and that he was completely drunk. As you might imagine, after driving for a few minutes, he lost control of the car, went through the safety barriers, and ended up flying all the way down into a field as the car caught on fire with Anderson completely unconscious inside it. If it weren't for his friends in the car behind acting fast, not only getting him off the car but also stopping the fire, well, who knows what could have happened. At 22 years of age, that could have been the last day of his life. Still, between a concussion and all kinds of different injuries, this accident ended up extending Anderson's time off the field all the way into the following season, with his name becoming more notorious than ever for all the bad reasons. Regardless, Anderson was self-aware. He could see his career completely derailing, but unfortunately, he still made all the wrong decisions. First going against the club, even telling the press that his biggest wish was to leave Manchester and move back to Porto, only to eventually renew his contract just 2 months later, after which he was hit with another tragedy as his stepfather, who he allegedly was very close to, passed away from a heart attack as well, this time midway through a local football tournament. As you might imagine, a year like that really puts things in perspective. And for a while, it did give some good signs of improvement. He scored twice against Schalke in the Champions League semi-finals, which is especially impressive considering he had only scored a single goal in his first 3 seasons at United, but then he missed the final and they lost the match. The following season he sort of earned his place back in the team, even being one of the main men in the 8-2 thrashing of Arsenal, but as always an injury left him out for the rest of the season. You could say it was just bad luck, but as his teammate Michael Owen would say, Anderson liked having the ball at his feet, and that was about it. He didn't care about recovery at all, so coming back from injuries took an eternity. Once again, he used all of his time on the sidelines to travel and party, going back to Brazil, where he would controversially refuse to take a breathalyzer test after being stopped by the police on the day of his birthday, causing outrage in the media, with Anderson slowly becoming remembered only for his off-the-field controversies and being a class clown rather than for his game. Regardless, one thing has to be said, it kind of worked for him. The fans found him hilarious and he became sort of a cult hero, a lovable idiot that even Sir Alex couldn't resist. But in 2013, Fergie retired, and now 25, Anderson was at the mercy of David Moyes, and they immediately clashed, with Anderson refusing to put in the work and being shipped off on loan to Fiorentina, where he struggled to even find a place on the bench. With Van Gaal it was even worse. He hated how Anderson was constantly overweight but refused to stop eating junk food. And after he was part of a 4-0 humiliation to third-tier MK Dons, he was pretty much dead to Van Gaal, who literally relegated him to playing with the under-23 squad, which is just embarrassing. So embarrassing in fact that Anderson just left, moving back to Brazil for good at 26 years of age. It was already a bad decision from the get-go, considering that he decided to join Rivals Internacional, getting every fan of Grêmio to instantly hate him. But then, his time there seemed like almost a montage of hilarious failures. He missed a penalty in the first match, then he was humiliated 5-0 by his old club, short after he was so unfit that after being subbed off 35 minutes into the game, he literally needed an oxygen mask. And by his second season, not only did he get into a physical fight with one of his teammates, he had a distaste of being part of the only ever Internacional squad to get relegated. But if that wasn't bad enough, the next season they loaned him out to Curitiba and they also got relegated for the 5th time in their history, making them the most commonly relegated club in Brazil, which, considering he had also been relegated with Grêmio early in his career, made it the 3rd historic relegation of his career. Almost reminds me of someone else. At this point it was completely hopeless. At 29 years of age, Anderson was second-tier material. Nobody wanted to pay his massive wages, and after 6 months without a club, he joined Adana Demirspor in the Turkish 2nd division, following the advice of his friends Pep and Quaresma, who enjoyed great spells in Turkey. But with Anderson, it was a different story. He played 15 matches in 2 years, and it just didn't work out, and so he was invited to reduce his wages by nearly 70% in order to stay as a sort of public relations ambassador, retiring at 31 years of age, having played his last Champions League match at 24. And if you think that his life would finally settle after retirement, let me tell you that just 1 year after, he was charged with aggravated theft and racketeering for allegedly being associated with a cryptocurrency scam through which a group of hackers had stolen 35 million reais from a Brazilian bank. Though he insists he is also a victim, saying his company had no idea where the money was coming from when they provided the robbers with the Bitcoin they needed. Regardless, it's just depressing that it got to this point.